Here, the dignitaries from all over the empire gathered for New Year's celebrations.
Coming up to Apadana, the visitor is quite impressed by the size of the columns, which were about 20 meters high. Then, passing through the giant doors that were 18 meters high, he would enter the huge audience hall. His heart is beating faster and faster. He can see a forest of columns, the multicolour carpets on the floor, a huge ornamented roof, and finally, in the background, he would ultimately see the king himself seated on his throne.
Unfortunately, in 330 BC, in an act of vandalism, Persepolis was destroyed by the fire kindled by Alexander and his Macedonian army. Thus, the richest city under the sun was no more. Only 7 years after the fall of Persepolis, Alexander died in 323 BC. Hence his successors, known as the Seleucids, ruled over Iran for more than a century. Eventually, the Parthians, a Persian-speaking tribal confederation from the northeast, drove the Seleucids out of the Iranian territories and ruled for almost 4 centuries. The earliest Iranian contact with Christianity took place during this era, when 3 wise men, or Parthian priests, traveled from Iran to Nazareth to pay homage to the infant Jesus. Consequently, Christianity has had almost 2,000 years of history in the Iranian cultural climate. The Parthians were eventually challenged by an ambitious and powerful governor of Fars, Ardeshir Papakan. In 224 AD, Ardeshir established the new Sasanian dynasty, named after his grandfather, Sasan.
It was a time that was, of course, to lead under the Parthians and Sasanians to a point where the Zoroastrian religion became the religion of Iran. The king was, in a sense, the representative of Ahura Mazda, the voice of the god, the person who kept the balance between the forces of good and evil. Kingship and the religion were one entity.
Traditionally, Zoroaster is believed to have lived sometime between 900 and 800 BC. Zoroastrianism is still practiced in some parts of Iran and India. Sasanian kings were known as city builders. Ardashir's special and unparalleled heritage is the radiant layout of his town. Ardashir Hooray, or the glory of Ardashir, which spreads beyond the city wall and all over the plain like the 20 spokes of a gigantic wheel. It was 2 kilometers in diameter, with its 40 meters high tower in the center as a symbol of God-given centralistic kingship. The location of the Sasanian Empire between the Far East and Europe had made it not only the link between East and West, but according to J. Darmesteter, as the spiritual bridge for humanity and a crossroad of civilizations. Through this crossroad, Iranian works of art reached the far corners of the known world. For over a millennium, Iranian merchants dominated trade between China and Europe through the Silk Road, centuries before Marco Polo set foot on Chinese soil. A precious commodity was the Sasanian glassware.
This is an interesting craft because, of course, these are very breakable, and so they're very, very valuable. So that when you find a piece of beautiful glassware, let's say in Jerusalem or anywhere else in Palestine or even Egypt, and it's identifiable as Sasanian, you have to think this came a long way at great expense and was highly prized. This was something that they mastered the technique of making these things, and it was transported throughout the world.
They influenced to the many cultural heritage, and the Japanese Emperor Shomu loved Iranian specimen, carpet, glassware, music instrument, etc.
This marvelous Sasanian glass tray, now at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, depicts the Sasanian king, Anushirvan. Anushirvan is celebrated for his great Ivan, known as the Taki Kasra in Ctesiphon. This great Ivan was originally about 50 meters in length, 26 meters in width, and 37 meters in height to the top of the vault. Wider than any vault in Europe, the French traveler Pascal Coste remarked that the Romans had nothing similar to it. The Sasanian period was a high point for luxurious life in antiquity. From feasting to hunting, playing musical instruments, to playing chess and polo. Sasanian kings had a special interest in depicting their glorious moments in silver dishes as well as rock reliefs.
The image of two animals facing one another is a special feature of Sasanian art. Although this textile you see here was discovered in Egypt, it actually belongs to Sasanian Iran. Here you can see the mythical animals facing each other as well as peacocks. A lot of similar textiles were taken to Europe, and they undoubtedly had an effect on Byzantine textiles.
The influence of Sasanian motifs can be seen on the external wall of the 12th century AD church of Saint-Étienne in Beauvais, France, and on the textiles from Italy, Spain, and even remote places in the Far East, such as Japan. The reign of Sasanians is distinguished by their numerous encounters with Rome, followed by Byzantium. Various wars between these two powers exhausted both sides and made them vulnerable to a new rising force.
By the middle of the 7th century, the Sasanian Empire had been weakened considerably because of wars with Byzantium, internal corruption, high taxation, the caste system had worried the people, so they were ready to accept a new revolution, the coming of Islam and Islamic troops into the Fertile Crescent and into Iran.
See unity, utter unity, no unity. In this is to be summarized the trunk and branches of the tree of faith.
Islam brought a revelation which, like a rain, poured upon the soil of the soul of the Iranian people, who, because of many factors, including the rise of Manichaeism and Mazdakism and during the Sassanid period and many social and religious and political events, were ready for the reception of this new message. The Iranians created a very major civilization before the rise of Islam. But the intellectual aspect of Persian civilization flowered with the coming of Islam.
To a people and a religion open to the world for novel ideas, the Iranians brought a unique gift, the experiences of an ancient and well-established civilization which the Arab rulers eagerly incorporated, including the ways to govern, to collect taxes, and to establish monumental architecture and art. The Bam Citadel in southeastern Iran is the largest and oldest mud brick city in the world. Here, before the devastating 2003 earthquake, distinct sectors were noticeable that could give us a relatively clear picture as to how the early Islamic cities in Iran might have looked. It consisted of the residential quarter that included a hypo-style mosque without a dome and a long bazaar, all enclosed by the main rampart. Then there was the governor's quarters on the hill, enclosed by another wall. A brilliant contribution of Iranian engineers was the development of the dome. As can be seen at the remains of the Ardashir Palace near Firuzabad, the inventive Iranian engineers had solved the question of putting a round dome on a square base by inventing squinches. Thus, in the Islamic period, the use of domes in the building of mosques started in Iran and spread to the whole Islamic world. Prophet Muhammad's decree for both men and women to learn and acquire knowledge from cradle to the grave encouraged Muslims to pursue learning. From the 9th century onwards, many Iranian Muslims became prominent figures in medicine and other disciplines. The greatest of these figures were Razi and Avicenna. Razi, known as Rhazes in the West, is also credited with the isolation of alcohol and its use in medicine as an antiseptic. Razi was the first physician to write a treatise on pediatrics. This is the resting place of Avicenna. A 1,000 years ago, Avicenna was one of the world's leading figures in philosophy, medicine, and pharmacology. His medical treatises, known as Canon, was a basic text at Oxford and Montpellier as late as the 17th century.
Die europäische Wissenschaft.
Since in those times the Church had banned research and studies, science was under great pressure in Europe. When the achievements of Islamic scholars in various sciences reached Europe through translated books from Spain, Sicily, or by students in Cordoba, then science began to progress here. Therefore, Islamic scholars were the purveyors of science in Europe.
Blühte eigentlich überhaupt erst die Wissenschaft hier auf.
In mathematics, Khwarazmi, from whence we get the word logarithm and algorithm, introduced algebra to Europe, as well as the decimal system of numerals instead of Roman numerals. While Omar Khayyam classified the forms of cubic equations, and Biruni did pioneering works in geography and empirical physics. Ibn Khaldun, the 14th century Arab philosopher of history, has thus recapitulated this development.
Most Muslim scholars, both in religious and